So if you look at the housing crisis, what's the problem? The problem is that we're just not building enough homes. And if you look back historically, the only time in which we built enough homes to meet demand is when we had the public sector and the social sector, so housing associations, building at scale. And we basically...
And what do you mean when you say at scale? Enough houses for the numbers?
Enough housing, so, 200,000 homes. And basically around the 1980s, we decided to kind of kill that model. We decided to move to a kind of model where we were reliant on private developers to build the homes. And we saw housing supply plummet, and we've never been able to recover from that.
And increasingly, it's been a small group of large housing developers.
Yeah. There's a handful, 5-6 developers that completely dominate the market. The small-scale developers have been kind of squeezed out because it's reliant on the amount of land that you can...
And that's a problem because why?
Because, well, two things. The more people that you have in the market, the more competition, the more willingness they are to kind of pump more housing into the market. But critically, because it's been so linked in with land. So developers essentially buy up the land, they hoover it all up, they bank a chunk of this land, and then they just build the amount that they think they want to, rather than the amount that we need. So we then get this mismatch. So in the end, the only way we break this crisis is by building huge amounts of social housing. So, we think we need about 3.2 million social homes. And, whether you build that over a 20-year period or 10-year period, that's what we need to do. And that's how we fix the housing crisis.
And is there a consensus in government, do you think, or in Parliament at least, around this, or a growing consensus?
I think there's definitely a consensus. Actually, the reason you've got everyone saying the same thing is that I think people now understand the problem. They know it is about supply. And I think the thing that's been the barrier is, yes, it's a supply problem, but we need to build at an unprecedented level. And that requires quite a lot of political will to chuck in the amount of investment that we need, but also political will to be willing for a more diverse number of players to be building the homes. So the biggest problem, and I worked in government at one point, worked on housing, and yes, there was consensus we needed to build. And we said, well, look, we need to pump money into councils. We need to pump money into housing associations.
To allow them to do it.
And that's where the political block came. On rent controls, which I do think are necessary in some of our cities, in London, for example, which is the most unaffordable city in Europe in terms of rent. It's for the birds to say that we don't need some kind of mechanism. Every single, rent controls is not some scary thing from the past. Most countries have some form of rent control. There are different ways in which you can do it. And, rent controls are not saying that landlords aren't going to get a return. And in fact, rent controls are not necessarily even saying that rents won't increase. So actually the idea that you can't, do what you're doing, get a steady, stable return, I think is for the birds. You absolutely can in this system. So let's design it in the right way. We've now got a system where landlords have so much bias and, protection. It's all in their favour. We are a nation of homeowners. That's now changing. So we're now hitting a tipping point where we're going to have more people who don't own a home. There was a survey out there. And will never own a home. There was a survey out yesterday that said that, 18 to 34%, 70% of them said home ownership was not something that their generation would enjoy. So we are now shifting. And the point becomes, when we now are no longer a nation of homeowners, what do we do with those people?
What could be achieved with, for example, the £2.1 billion no deal plannings?
Absolutely. So we've seen the government having war cabinets over no deal. We've seen dedicated focus. We've seen 2 billion emerge like miraculously from nowhere. And I just think, imagine if we had that level of focus and dedication over a 6-month period, 1 year period, just on housing. And all that political energy, all that political will, anything.
And money.
Wartime mentality. We've got a crisis. We're going to try and solve it. Imagine what we could do.
What's your sense about what it will take for that political will to finally show itself?
I think we need a government that comes in and says this is our number one priority, and we are willing to both unlock the investment we need to do this. We're willing to say that actually it is a role of the government. It is a role of the government at both the national and local level to house people. It's a basic right. And I think we've lost sight of that. And I think you need a government to say, actually, this should just be, a public service offer. It should be something that every citizen expects. If I can't afford to buy my own home, if I can't afford to be in the rental market, I know
something
that
affordable is available for me.
And until you have that, we won't solve the problem.